So Nassif, who do you recognize yourself as? Coach, mentor, leader? What's the right word for you that resonates with you?
Maybe back in the day, the only word I would actually choose would have been learner. I find many words end up labeling people and they
Hmm.
box them and they limit them. Professionally, I'm a leadership development consultant that has a lot of facets, coaching being one of them, obviously, especially in the
Right.
transformation field, and much more.
Mm.
So I would love at one point to say I am a full-fledged holistic human. I know I am. I would love to
Mm.
realize it and get to that stage on a
Mm.
unitative level, but that's very philosophical, right?
Philosophical, but also settling, right? It's a
Yeah.
liberating way of recognizing self.
Yeah, in many ways, I
Mm.
think I've heard this. I can't recall who said it specifically, but somebody did say something along the lines that when we are born, we end up going on a journey to discover who we are. And
Mm.
that requires us peeling back a lot of the onion layers. So, yeah,
Mm.
it's a journey.
Mm. Mm. So tell me a little bit of a background of yourself, Nassif. Where you come from? What are you busy doing these days? And what has been your journey?
Okay. Originally, I was born and partially raised in Beirut in the
Mm-hmm.
Lebanon in the middle of the civil war.
Mm.
Two wonderful parents who have since passed. I always say they did their best with what they had, and that's wonderful. I have two sisters, and we, much like many Lebanese people around that area, we spoke French at home.
Mm.
I went and somehow to a German school because, and that's a fun fact, it was the closest. So safety reasons, why civil war. Ended up learning the language fully. Went ultimately to an American university, the Notre Dame University, and topped the whole thing off with a specialization, an MBA basically, an IE Business School in Madrid. That's been my progression on an educational level. Professionally, I'm officially a computer science graduate. I worked in that field in media for 3-4 years or so before transitioning into business. And then
Mm.
after that time, I found my passion in helping others unlock their potential. And I ended up
Mm.
transitioning into what was known back then as training and development before
Mm.
going into the L&D space and ultimately the leadership advisory space, which is where I operate today.
Mm. And so, what's your full-time engagement now?
In what sense? What do I do on the whole day?
In terms of your work?
I spend most of my time developing the business. I started the firm relatively recently, 2 years ago, called it nxtARC, as in the
Mm.
next chapter, stemming from a deeply held belief I have that we are stories and we are
Mm.
called to self-author, and the next arc is the next
Mm.
chapter of our leadership story. So I spend some time doing that.
Mm.
I do spend quite a lot of time as well coaching. Most of my clients at
Mm.
this stage are top of the house executives. So that's your CXOs and board members and
Mm.
the team. Obviously, I love spending time with the team,
Mm.
developing talent
Mm.
there, and ultimately helping them become better versions of themselves.
Wonderful, wonderful, Nassif. What a journey. And tell me, you were born and raised in a place where there's civil war and a lot of
Mm.
things were happening. How have they shaped you? Are there any influence of the values from
Mm.
there or that history has? Who have you become with that?
It's an interesting question that I often ponder. I don't know that I have the
Mm.
full answer yet, but what I can share is maybe two elements that I think are important. On one side, the importance of
Mm.
family. My parents did a very good job at
Mm.
shielding us, protecting us from obviously the physical dangers, but also making sure we got our education, we were fed, and so on and so forth. After the war, though it is debatable if the war in Lebanon ended up really ending, I mean, bombs stopped falling from the sky, but somehow the war kept going for a while. After the war, it was a rather weird time in the sense that there's a lot of things happening that are quite shady. Anything from substance abuse,
Mm.
perhaps in the neighborhood, to other things. And my mom had the
Mm.
wonderful idea of enrolling me in the official, the Lebanese Boy Scout movement. Today, I credit a lot of character traits I have to that. This is where I learned the value of camaraderie, relying on your network, on people
Mm.
you know, people who are competent, trusting others, obviously, but also discipline and self-confidence and how to
Mm.
speak in front of an audience of 500, 600, 1,000 people. That's something I started learning
Mm.
as early as when I was 12, because you're sort of compelled to present certain things,
Mm.
to play along, I would say, in what is a safe environment, even though back then the concept of psychological safety was never really made famous.
Mm.
I stayed there for quite some time. I think that in the back of my mind, I want to believe that had my mother not made that decision for me, I was maybe 11 or 10 years
Mm.
old back then, I might have very easily ended up joining some form of gang or other shady group right down the neighborhood. So that was a big part, I would say.
Mm. Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, for me, I believe that the experiences can lead you to any kind of outcomes, positive or negative. I think what it turned out to be for you was more positive. So I think the
Thankfully.
informal training from parents, the
Thankfully,
informal
yes.
training, I think.
Yes, even the
Mm.
negatives, I would say they're not really negative. You always learn.
Mm.
I'm very grateful for a lot of the mistakes I've made. I do regret some or regretted some. Today I look back and I say maybe this did not happen to me, but it's happened in service of me. Cognitively, it makes
Mm.
sense. Took me a bit of time to realize it, obviously.
And that's how it is. I think in the moment it may look like a problem or a trouble, but when it's over, it's an accomplishment.
Yeah, in more ways than one.
So, yeah. So tell me, Nassif, about the work that you do around leadership development
Mhm.
specifically. What do you do and how do you do it?
So we do predominantly two things. There's a lot of side elements to it, but it helps to think of them as two main domains. One element is leadership assessment. So how much of an impactful leader are you? And this is
Mm.
something we do for individual leaders as well as for the collective,
Mm.
so the teams, think the executive committee, for
Mm.
example, or the board. And then,
Mm.
which is where we shine, we do the development piece. So the simplest way of thinking of
Mm.
development, obviously, is executive coaching. That's an event of several or a series of events throughout a journey. But then we also do team
Mm.
journeys, offsites. And then we tend to do this in a
Mm.
very bespoke way in what we call contextualized. So it has to
Mm.
resonate with the client, it has to resonate with their industry,
Mm.
with their core challenges, but
Mm.
most importantly, with their culture. What we find
Mm.
is a lot of the times, many solutions are being imported without being contextualized, right? It's a copy paste
Mm.
from some sort of different country, I would say, different place. Now, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with that. It just doesn't necessarily
Mm.
resonate as much as it should. So we tend to
Mm.
contextualize, and we find that lands much, much better with the clients and their teams.
Mm. Mm. And what assessments do you do?
Would depend. We do a
Mm.
lot of psychometrics, obviously. At the same time, we do recognize that some of the psychometrics may be overused, so that's not enough. We do triangulate that. We do a lot
Mm.
of references, confidential. We
Mm.
amalgamate people's perspectives on a specific leader. That somewhat helps us
Mm.
understand their reputation, which is 50% of their identity. We do
Mm.
also vertical development assessments. So, how conscious is this leader? We have some tools for that, as well as our potential model. So we have a potential model that
Mm.
helps not only assess where the person tends to be these days, but also how much more they could go, depending on whether or not they
Mm.
wish to do that. So you put everything
Mm.
together in a specific way. Sometimes we do other things, such as organizational network assessments. So what is the impact of that person on the system? And vice versa. What's the impact of the
Mm.
system on that person?
Mm.
So it depends on the business case. You put all of this together and you then have a very solid consult for business cases such as succession planning, perhaps, or leadership acceleration, or integration, or perhaps post M&A activities, right? When you have two excos that come
Mm.
together.
And then the intervention after assessments starts in the sense that you
Mm.
deploy the leadership development phase after that, right?
This is what we like to do. Sometimes, mind you, we
Mm-hmm.
have different perspectives. Some clients just want the assessment. We do not
Mm.
recommend this approach, but they might have their own reasons.
Mm.
Perhaps that is for selection purposes. That is fine.
Mm.
Sometimes we're asked to
Mm.
come in and do just the development piece without the assessment by relying on either internal assessments that they have conducted or a third party. We also don't recommend that because we don't really know how that assessment was made, but we could do it if the client asks us to do it. Ideally, we do the whole
Mm.
thing, and it tends
Mm.
to be limited in time.
Mm.
We believe that the interventions should be
Mm.
spread over 12, 15, maybe 18 months. But the last thing we want is to end up creating some sort of codependency with the client.
Nassif, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you now. In between, it got frozen for me.
That's okay.
And Nassif, so there's a concept of rethinking leadership. When I was doing research, I figured that out. Yeah. So tell me, what's your take on rethinking leadership? How do you define it?
There's a lot of things that can really play into that. Let me start by saying that many of the current, what we call the competency model, tend to be outdated. A lot of them have been proven scientifically to be outdated. That's the first element. The second element is skills by themselves tend to be insufficient. So that's something that is
Mm.
prevalent. And then what we
Mm.
tend to do is we encourage leaders, and we see this in leadership development programs, to add skills in order to solve today's problems and maybe the challenges of tomorrow. What is, however, needed is to shift in how the leaders tend to make sense of the world, right? And refrain or steer away from this idea of over-relying on competencies. And the outcome is clear. It ends up reducing your leadership development program into a checklist, right? So where's the context? Where's the complexity? Where's the consciousness? It's not really there. So the real focus for us is really to turn the camera inward, is to focus on evolving inner structures, not just outer behavior. Now, that doesn't mean we do not need the outer behavior. We need to figure both out. But for us, at least at nxtARC, this can only happen once we do the inner work.
How do you do that inner work?
There's a lot of pausing in that. A lot of the leaders, especially if you think of the typical CXO, it's somebody who's quite educated, somebody who's well versed, often a subject matter expert that transitioned into an executive role, an MBA, maybe 2 masters, I don't know. These type of people tend to be programmed to immediately solve. How do you unlearn that? Pausing helps. Helping the leader to land in this space and really hold that specific space where maybe 2 truths, 2 paradoxes, 2 polarities exist at the same time, and refrain from immediately tackling it with what is often a linear concept or an outdated mode of resolution, and allowing for the solution to emerge. That tends to be quite powerful. There is a reliance on the system, obviously, but when you do it in a safe way, in a group or in a team of people who really want what's the best for the company that they're part of, magic tends to happen. That's one simple way.
Right. And even in my work, I call it, slowing down to speed up. Just learn to slow down first, and that would ultimately bring the speed for us. So how is it, rethinking leadership? I mean, you said that the competency model is outdated, and then you do an inner work. And you also spoke about horizontal development. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the problem that you find with that?
So just to make it slightly clear for everyone listening at one point, right? Horizontal development is simply adding skills. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all need it. I think you, me, everyone in the world is currently trying to learn how to navigate AI. That is us adding a skill that is required for us to move forward in today's world. However, what tends to happen, much like a bookshelf, sometimes you run out of space. So you don't have on that specific shelf enough room for an additional skill. And maybe you don't need that skill. Maybe what you need is to go up. And that's the idea of vertical development. It's about really expanding, learning a bit more adaptability, and expanding the mental and emotional complexity with which leaders tend to operate. It's not just about giving more tools. What we find is at higher stages, and what I mean by that is not just levels of consciousness, but also responsibilities. Leaders would benefit from learning how to hold more ambiguity, thinking more systematically, and reflecting much more deeply before acting, which is exactly what you said earlier about stepping back a little bit to jumping forward, or pausing, as I mentioned.
Right. And that's where doing leadership versus being a leader.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Everybody's focused on doing leadership. Very few think of, how can I be a leader? That's why for us, the work we do focus a lot on reflection. So take a step back, write down the pen and the paper. I'm old school. I always invite people to write things down on a pen, on a paper. But my trick is actually, I'm just sort of helping them focus their attention on a specific point, as opposed to using a Chrome Explorer element that has 55 tabs open. So a lot of reflection, a lot of systems awareness, and a lot of polarities navigation. So this helps the vertical muscles to train more often than not.
And I think that's really about being a leader, right? Going inward, vertical, and creating a different architecture within self. Yeah. So overall, how do you define your philosophy for transformation, leadership transformation?
It begins within. I mean, you have to really take a step back and turn the camera inwards and meet yourself to a certain extent and figure out what is it that makes you tick. How do you move from being what is often automatic or automated set of responses to something that is much more conscious, something that is much more intentional and much more purposeful, really. And if you think about it, it's interesting. I like to people watch. Very often I sit back, I do this often in the IFC, I sit in a cafe and observe people. And you realize that these are people who really are completely absorbed by their phone. It's almost as if they're inhabited. And so, for the lack of a better word, and I mean it with no offense, obviously, part of the work that we do is to help them take that focus, that attention and that intention and that consciousness from outside, which is on the phone, back in. So one of the questions I would ask often is, what is it within yourself that you're bringing to the table today? Or maybe if somebody's working on development, you would see one of the questions being, for instance, which part of you needs to evolve for you to be more successful in this role? So there is a lot of inner world work.
And that leads to unleashing the potential for a leader, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about the leadership potential, framework that you have, and let's talk about that now.
This is a point of contention in many of the studies. Everybody I've ever met struggles with how do we look at potential. Think nine box grid or 9 grid box. I don't recall. Everybody calls it something. We find that many of the models treat potential as a static trait or some sort of prediction. We like to look at it as a dynamic sort of capability, something we can cultivate as opposed to something that needs to be extracted. So we look at potential through 4 dimensions, and they're both pairs. We look at it, there is awareness, so there's inner self-awareness and then outer awareness, systems awareness. There's courage, and it's the courage to think and the courage to act, so fortitude and bravery. You have curiosity, which is inner world curiosity. What is it that makes me tick? And outer world curiosity. And last but not least, agility, which has 2 components, flexibility and resilience/grit. So the ability to go above and beyond or through certain hurdles as needed. For us, it's an indicator. It's one of many. We don't want to fall into the trap of many of the psychometrics where they end up being misused, as I previously mentioned. Tools are great. It's just how you use them. And at the same time, for us, real potential is revealed intention. It's not revealed in an assessment of some sort. Like in moments of stretch or heated instances, this is where the real potential services, and this is a little bit where our assessments and coaching tend to be focused.
So talk to me about those 4 areas again. So it's awareness, it's what's the next one?
So awareness, curiosity, courage, and agility.
Awareness, courage, curiosity, and agility.
Yes, sir.
And when you say courage, talk to me a little bit about courage. I think awareness we all understand, but how courage applies to what we do.
Okay. There's 2 elements to courage for us. There's the courage to think, so to formulate your own thoughts and then to be able to draft them down and perhaps bring them to life and perhaps modulate something or create an MVP in some instances. But that's not enough. That will not move the needle. You see these in this day and age, a lot of people, some, maybe not a lot of them, but some of them like to stand behind their keyboards and sort of write things without necessarily sharing, or perhaps sharing behind the keyboard. So for us to move the needle, you need bravery, which is part of courage. You need the ability to act on this sense of courage. And we often see, especially at the executive level, that this is often a point of contention. A lot of people have great ideas. They just don't share. Well, why not? Maybe it's an instance of lack of psychological safety. Maybe it's not the right timing. Maybe the structure of the organization is not conducive to this type of, speaking up. You can see how much value you can bring to the client simply by sharing these observations. And we tend to do this in a very kind, human, and confidential way. We never reveal the source or the person who quoted whatever. We always maintain confidentiality because this is in service of them.
And also, I think then this becomes a habit and a practice, because the more safe you feel and it's going to be confidential, I think then you open up more.
Yeah. One of the fun fact, I was doing an assessment yesterday, and as often as it usually happens, I asked the person, do you think you're a good leader? And the person says, oh, I'm a great leader. And then I said, fantastic. Do you mind if we confidentially ask your team? You could see the tension rise. And the place I'm coming from is really, the only group, for the lack of a better word, that could say this is a great leader is the people you lead.
Right.
So
right.
it makes sense.
Right. And that also requires courage, right? To get whatever comes.
100%. In the playback session, so one of our rules or requirements is whenever we do an assessment, we have to play it back to the leader, to the executive. Because this person has invested so much time with us, they have to know. They have to know what's going well and what they could do maybe differently or perhaps double down on. It does take courage to have this conversation.
Mm.
A lot of elements surface that maybe in their shadows, maybe they have derailers that they never considered, perhaps they
Mm.
have some impression management challenge. It takes a lot of courage
Mm.
from us and them, but more from them, obviously, because
Mm.
it's a mirror.
True, true. And let's move to the third one, which is curiosity too. I
Mhm.
mean, how do you define curiosity in your work?
So there's two aspects to that as well. Let's start with this. I'm going to flip it with the external curiosity. This one is easy. And whenever I think of external or outer world curiosity, I'm reminded of my nephew.
Okay.
Is 3 years old, and he has the ability to remain mesmerized by whatever he discovered, whether
Mm.
it's a white cat, which he has
Mm.
never seen before, or a big banana or fruit of some sort, or maybe recently he's been obsessed with dinosaurs, for example,
Mm.
little toys.
Mm.
So the way he tends to look at these objects or things he sees in life is always with an air of fascination. That's
Mm.
curiosity. He wants to find out more. He wants to explore more. And we
Mm.
know from studies that this is key. This is
Mm.
quintessential for the
Mm.
development of any leader.
Mm.
The other piece that is slightly more interesting, at least for us in the work that we do, is the inner world curiosity.
Mm.
So, as an executive, what assumptions do you like to make?
Mm.
What unconscious beliefs do you have that you
Mm.
might be honoring in a way that prevents you from achieving your objectives?
Mm.
Is the track you're on, so the
Mm.
path you've chosen, is that something you have really chosen, or was that chosen for you?
Mm.
That's the level of the conversations we tend to have with executives, and very often the answers are scary.
Mm. And very uncomfortable, because I think most of the time you will notice the leaders haven't really been through those questions and not introspect.
Yeah, and they've
Yeah.
avoided them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, those who haven't, they do these interesting, mind game tricks on themselves. They put up walls, right?
Mm.
They shield themselves from
Mm.
whatever they think is coming from outside in the form of question. It's a threat, obviously. But there is a point where the pain becomes unbearing.
Mm.
And that pain is coming from the tensions we spoke of earlier, which are now leaking. They are growing. They are being much more electrifying.
Uh,
And this is when they come to us and they say, I can't take it anymore. And
mm.
they have invisible burdens. All of, not all, a lot of the high performing leaders often carry those invisible burdens. So what I see very often, this should be of no surprise. Loneliness is there,
Mm.
doubt or self-doubt is there. And one that we're picking up very recently a lot of is a fear of irrelevance,
Mm.
which I found very interesting because I used to observe that with much older people.
Mm.
It's uncanny to see this in an executive who's 45 or 50 years old.
Tell me a little bit more about fear of irrelevance. How does that translate into behavior?
Well, consider, for instance, a leader who has been in a company for a very long time, a lifer.
Mm.
So 15, 20, 25 years. That company often becomes part of their identity. It's
Right.
almost as if the persona sticks.
Mm. Mm.
Then they get close to retirement or not. Maybe
Mm.
they need to change countries. Maybe
Mm.
the company was acquired and they need
Mm.
to permutate to something else. If your role is too imbued within your sense of identity, you ask yourself a lot of questions. What next? Am I
Mm.
being sidelined? Am I somebody who is still useful? And this is something that sometimes will get them to derail.
Mm.
So all of their derailers pop up. Sometimes they sabotage themselves,
Mm.
right? Whether it's by missing out on meetings
Yeah.
or deadlines, or
Yeah.
perhaps unconsciously, I would say, promoting some form of misalignment or asymmetry of information among the team,
Mm.
not setting them up for not setting them up for success,
Mm.
and unconsciously setting them up for some sort of failure or hiccup. So we do see that.
It's all sort of a self doubt then that creeps in and that translates into all their behaviors. It seems, right?
Yeah, yeah, in a way or another. Yeah.
And also, when you were talking about curiosity and you spoke about the inner curiosity, especially, I was thinking that for it to be there, I think there needs to be courage too,
Yes.
and courage to be vulnerable.
Yes.
I think that's sometimes
Yes.
seen as a very negative thing, but I think that it
Yeah.
takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is
So
Go ahead. One thing to call out maybe from a cultural perspective, right?
Huh.
I am Arab and I live in the Arab world. I live in Dubai. Still in this day and age, many of us confuse vulnerability with weakness. It has improved. It has
Hmm.
tremendously improved, but there is a difference.
Hmm.
This is very important. And part of what we like to do is to put up that mirror,
Uh-huh.
to put up those facts, and to help people conduct these micro experiments, these safe to fail probes, so to
Hmm.
speak, to just either validate or invalidate this deeply held assumption.
Hmm.
If my team feels I need help, does that mean I'm weak or vulnerable? That's a very common question. And
Right.
you will find a plethora of answers,
Uh,
but that's something we invite people to experiment with.
hmm. 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 And what are some of the other observations now you have when you're coaching leaders? I mean, once you said is the fear of irrelevance. It's something else
Mhm.
as well coming up that you're noticing now.
It's a good question. So my answer is biased because I think in the last 3 months it's been a theme somehow. Take
Mm-hmm.
that with a grain of salt. Somehow we've observed, and that's me and my colleagues, we've observed leaders who are craving freedom on one side and at the same time feel bound by responsibility.
Mm.
Again, a polarity. This polarity drives amazing results,
Mm.
but often it seems to be leaving them feeling empty on the inside.
Mm.
And our job is not to judge that or fix it, but rather to hold the mirror,
Mm.
ask questions, ask the right question, and
Mm.
help them fall without breaking in a
Mm.
safe space
Mm.
if needed. That is where transformation happens.
Right. And just because polarity is there, I think too much of a back and forth and a lot of tension there then.
Well, it's part of the game. And it's not easy because we are somehow trained, even as early as our primary school education,
Mm.
to solve.
Mm.
Last week, I was giving a keynote in Madrid
Mm-hmm.
for my university, my alma mater, and I gave them a case. There was an audience of 50 something people. I gave them a case, and then I told them, after they read it, obviously, we're not solving the case. I just want you to think of the following three questions. The level of lack of comfort in that room was palpable from across the street. Why would you give us a case if you're not going to ask us to solve it? And many of them already had the solution, and all the solutions I'm sure were wonderful, but that
Yeah.
wasn't the point of the case. The point of the whole exercise was to show them that pause again, take a
Mm.
step back, think,
Mm.
what is it you're missing? What assumptions are you bringing to the table?
Mm.
What are you not seeing?
Mm.
Whatever it is you're thinking of, is it coming from heuristics, old patterns? What is this serving? Is it
Mm.
serving you or this is the case or protagonist of the case?
Mm.
And these are people of different ages, but a lot of them were executives. So I would
Mm.
say 45 and above. It was unbelievably uncomfortable.
Hmm. Such an autopilot, right? I mean, if it's a case, we need to look at a solution.
Yeah, immediately. And
Hmm.
part of this whole slowing down is about breaking that pattern.
Hmm.
You don't always have to solve. Sometimes you just have to sense.
Hmm. And tell me, what would sensing be here?
I would check things out in different ways through different lenses. Maybe with the team, I would potentially conduct safe to fail experiments.
Hmm.
So a good way to think about it is products, right? Pick 3 products in 3 markets and launch each in 3 different ways, see what happens. It's a minimum investment. This is the simplest way to explain it. But in leadership terms, maybe you would want to bring in the perspective of the others in one place
Hmm.
and see what the collective has to think about that and how
Hmm.
the collective is envisioning this.
Hmm.
You might think you're making the decisions because you're very innovative, but then you
Hmm.
ask and you look around you and you realize that most people are actually very conservative and they want to maintain certain traditions and values, and that's fine. You
Hmm.
just need to know where the collective decision is coming from. That's sensing.
And how do you do safe to fail experimentation?
That's an interesting one. It tends to be an executive decision or an executive, I would say, direction, more or less.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
can use specific frameworks or approaches or modalities. We have our partners that specialize in complexity. So that's the Kinefin people. It's David Snowden's team. They have their own tools for that. So we're
Hmm.
trying to bring this to the market and contextualize it. Again,
Hmm.
back to this idea of, resonating with the industry, the function, and the culture here. And one way to do this is to use those tools, but also we can always make these experiments emerge from team offsites or from team meetings that we conduct. It's a bit more, I would say, traditional, pen and
Hmm.
paper,
Hmm.
but people appreciate that. because they've co-created or co-emerged whatever it is they've decided to experiment with. They've agreed on the budget, they've committed to whatever actions need to be made, they've aligned, and they have a charter to move forth with, and then they all own it, including us who tend to be their guides, so to speak. So these are two different ways.
And so it's power to perspective, concept which I speak about. I think is it also to get more perspective?
Yes, because the more you probe, so think about it. So you and I both live in Dubai. It's very easy to get from point A to point B. All you need is Google Maps and you're done. The
Right.
AI will do the work for you. Imagine now you're in a very foggy and dark forest. I'm maybe being a little bit reductivist, but it's just for the purpose of the conversation. So you want to enter or cross a dark and foggy forest. How do you do that? Do you just pick a direction and work and then walk? Maybe there's a bear right in front of you. Maybe there's a lake on the left-hand side, or there's quicksand on the... So the best way to do this is to sense and probe and go around and try here, try there, see what happens. And you can do this collectively. This gives you a better overview of the landscape. This avoids the classical linear thinking, which is where leaders make a lot of mistakes. This provides you with much more informational points, and it will inform your final decisions in the end in the best way possible.
And hence it's about sensing it then
100%.
really.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about your work in Middle East now. I mean, you do a lot of work in Middle East and of course the other part of the world, but what's specific to Middle East you find in leadership development as an opportunity?
I think this is where the opportunity lies. I mean, the Middle East is where, first of all, leadership is needed. Conscious leadership is needed even more, hence the concept of vertical development. And it's more or less in progress. That's why it's exciting. It's evolving, and we're happy to be part of that story. I've been doing this in the region in different roles for 20 years in different capacities at this point. I've seen it evolve. I've seen it grow, and I pride myself in being part of that chapter, that arc, so to speak, in the Middle East. And it's really full of potential. And what we want to do is help unlock that as much as possible. The biggest, I would say, value add we could have is, as opposed to imported models, ours are, again, contextually and culturally relevant. They land well with the clients, especially with all the transformation that's happening and with the polarities that are there. So one interesting polarity here, you have modernity in infrastructure, but at the same time, tradition in values. That's uncanny, but that's beautiful. So how can we lead in that space? Plus, with the growth that's happening, you'll notice that many public and, well, both public and privately held institutions are now more subject to succession challenges, scaling, global scrutiny, global benchmarking. So that calls for a different type of leader. And what we do is really try to help everyone unlock the potential they need to be able to step into those shoes, deliver on the mandates. And we can do this in Arabic and in English.
Okay. Sounds perfect. So tell me, Nassif, if one wants to get in touch with you to learn more about the work that you do, and if need consulting on that, how do we reach out to you, or how do they reach out to you?
So the easiest way is to either find us on LinkedIn or go to our website, which is www.nxtARC.com. You have our contact details there. We're happy to have those conversations. All our conversations are confidential, and we will always be happy to listen and be of service of anyone that wants to help their leadership get to the next level.
That's great, and I'm going to make sure that we put the LinkedIn link of your profile into the description of our YouTube video and the other channels where we post our conversation.
Thank you, Aaron.
Nassif, it was really a wonderful conversation with you, and I think I'm taking away a lot of notes for myself and learned a lot in this conversation, especially the leadership potential model that we speak about. I think it's so relevant, so current, and so applicable for anybody, not just in a leadership position, but I think at all levels in any context and setup. So thank you so much, Nassif, for giving time and appearing today on this podcast. And thank you again.
Thank you.